I know there's disagreement on that, but we know that we have the opportunity to have resources available. We'll take out the artificial scarcity and allow us the chance to have resources that can be used for transportation purposes that will benefit Michiganians as well. And finally, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, Congress passed legislation for funding of a major road redevelopment project in our state, the I-75 corridor. 13 years ago. Those funds have not been released yet. They have not been released yet. As a result of, the only thing I can tell is I've delved into to try to get those funds simply released. They've been authorized already. It's not adding to anything. 12 years, 13 years ago. But due to Michigan Department of Transportation, U.S. Highway Department, I would say collusion of trying to set agendas, those dollars have not been released. And so we have dollars that are owed to Michigan to be used on our infrastructure that would help the state legislatures. They wrestle with a very thorny issue that could take care of that problem, significant problem. It's not there. So those battles need to go on. And I think bureaucratic entities like the Departments of Transportation need to understand that when the people's representatives speak, in this case members of Congress, they must be carried out. And then the administration must follow that up.
I'm glad thank you. I apologize for interrupting the sequence. There's three questions here, and I'm going to try to combine them because they all go to the same thing. And one is expressing concern about the debt your children and grandchildren face. The second one is the amount of debt. I guess it's 17 trillion, and it's a little bigger than our annual gross domestic product. And when Congress returns, the debt ceiling will be an item of discussion. Your thoughts?
Simplistically, a debt approaching 17 trillion. If you want to go to my official website, you can see the debt clock and see how fast those wheels turn. Stop and think that almost $17 trillion in debt laid on the back of every one of us in the room, plus my 3 grandkids that are waiting for me at Camp Walberg, back home in the suburbs of Tipton, when I get home. Those 3 grandkids also owe $50,000 each for our national debt. They've not asked for it. They didn't come to Grandpa and say, Grandpa, could you keep spending more so we'll have a debt to pay? Would you fund this project so we'll have that for us? They didn't ask that. We all owe that. That's unconscionable. Now, if you went to other aspects of the whole budgeting process, it'd be well beyond 17 trillion. So we have to get a grip on what the federal government is responsible for. That's why the Constitution is there. It limits us, and it really limits us beyond the state government, because the state has authority that they give to the federal government in the Constitution. That's how it was supposed to be. We reversed it. And we've made the state of Michigan subservient in many ways to the federal government. The only way to deal with that is to provide mechanisms to control the revenue that we bring in. We're bringing in more revenue to the federal government than the history of the United States. It's not the issue of revenue. It's the issue of priority expenditures. Until we get those priorities in place and limit ourselves and then say to the state leaders, you have the authority and we will leave the resources there for you as well. Now you make good priority decisions. And I think this state legislature, this governor to a great degree has made wonderful, tough decisions, but nonetheless, they have a balanced budget. They pass budgets on time. Congress hasn't passed a budget for 6 years coming up. And we're talking about continuing to raise debt ceilings. I think before we do that, we have to have some stipulations in place that says there have to be significant restructuring goes on before we raise the debt ceiling further just to put our grandkids more in debt.
direction, or Kent,
Well,
want to jump in?
I'm not an expert on federal issues. I will say that there's been a lot of different looks at the budget, and I think at one point there was an online opportunity to create your own budget and I was able to balance the budget in about half an hour. And I know, I'm certainly not saying that, Congressman, that it's a simple job, because my job is not simple. But personally, I feel that we need to be also addressing revenue and expenditures and not just one side or the other. And I think, as I've also said about transportation, that if everybody put a nickel in, and I'm talking about everybody, so it's either through a cut or an increase, depending on your situation, where you're coming from. But if everybody put a little bit in a much better position in this country and in this state. And I do think that our economy isn't moving the way it should. I think there's some really philosophical differences. I believe that it's a consumer-based economy and we don't have enough money churning in the middle class. This is a basic difference between the middle class and the middle class. And the way to do that is to give the middle class more opportunities for money. So that would be a tax cut and a corresponding tax increase on the higher income. And we're not talking about a huge amount of change. What we're talking about is discrete adjustments. And one of the things, I totally respect having a budget. When I first got on Saline City Council 20 years ago, we didn't have a budget. I actually implemented a 5-year budget in the city of Saline because it was one of those once a year, and I am pretty much surprised that we don't do a longer range. Look at where our money's coming from, where it's going to, and do a longer term trend on these things, because I know there's a lot of things in the federal government that it's a really frustrating, I'm sure it's really frustrating for the congressman to have this dialogue. There are some really big problems that we need to fix as a country, and we need to work together. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to that. I'm not an expert. I highly respect the discourse that goes on in MTC, and I'm sure it's very frustrating. But I hope that we all work really hard together to make our country stronger and better.
Send your budget.
It's more in line with the president, to be honest with you, than the current majority, which is why I was very as a Democrat and I did not personally vote for. So, anyway.